Magazine holiday party and pushback against the empire. I'm so glad you could all be here. Let's just give a round of applause for ourselves for being here. So my name is Rachel Hu. I am the co-host of the Covert Action Magazine podcast, Covert Action Bulletin. We release it every single week on different topics happening every single week. Of course, there is so much for us to get into on a weekly basis. You're going to have to just make sure that you tune in to hear more. So I'm very happy to be emceeing tonight's event and coming and talking with you all about the great work that Covert Action Magazine is doing. And we so support all of you guys and all that you bring to the table, and the fact that you're here means so much, because today is about building up independent media. It's about coming together to talk about the issues that our world continues to face and how to find solutions and how we find those solutions together, and especially how we continue to make sure that everything that we are talking about here is not just talked about in a single room, but we can amplify it everywhere possible to make sure that we have media that speaks for and by the people. So we have so much to get into tonight. We have many speakers that will be talking to you about a variety of issues and things, but the theme that we want to weave throughout tonight and we want you guys to take away is that independent media is necessary for building political movements. It's necessary for continuing to build a movement that is capable of fundamentally changing this country in the ways that is absolutely necessary and bringing down the empire, so to speak. So I'm happy to introduce our very first speaker, who's going to really give you guys I'm just really excited to introduce our first speaker. He's an incredible person who's dedicated his life to this work, and especially dedicated so much of his life to Covert Action Magazine and continuing the legacy of his father. We're going to have Chris Agee come up and speak. He is the executive editor of Absolutely Necessary. Chris Agee is the executive editor. Yeah, let's give him a real applause. He's the executive editor of Covert Action Magazine, and he has so much to share with you, so welcome to the stage.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rachel. Okay, and thank you all for coming to this event. We are going to enjoy this pushback against empire, right? And we're going to have a party and a fundraiser to support Covert Action Magazine. Can everybody hear me here? Do I got to talk into the microphone? Here, let's see if we can raise this up a little bit. All right. Great. So we have a great lineup of speakers to shed light on what are dark and menacing times. But I first want to thank everyone who has shown up tonight and all of those of you who are online watching. I want to thank also our distinguished speakers for coming out tonight, and also online. I want to thank our writers, the writers who have been writing for Covert Action, which has been such an incredible experience of people coming from all over the world sending us their articles. I want to thank our editorial staff, particularly Jeremy Kuzmarov. Where are you? There you are, Jeremy Kuzmarov, right there, our managing editor. And of course, Bill Montrose, who is not here, he is our fact checker who painstakingly proofs and fact checks each and every article. Bill Montrose. Let's give a round of applause for Bill. And of course, we have our associate editor, Roger Annis. Did Roger make it tonight, or is he still holed up in Canada? Yeah? Okay. Maybe you're online. Hi, Roger. Where is the camera? I guess it's over there. And then, of course, I'd like to thank one of the co-founders of the magazine, who at 82 years old is still working diligently on this. His name is Louis Wolff. Let's give a round of applause for Louis Wolff. Yeah, Louis. Okay, he helped found the magazine 44 years ago, believe it or not, in 1978, I believe it was. He's still very much our guide in this work, and after many decades of research and activism. I also want to particularly thank the organizers of this event tonight. And first and foremost, I want to thank Tiger Roque. Tiger Roque. Let's give him a round of applause. Where are you, Tiger? There's Tiger over there. And of course, Bob Howlett, who is not here. He had to go home early today. And then we have also Jeremy and Steve Brown, Michael Locker, Josh Eberly, and the entire development team. Thank you very much for organizing this event. So let's give them a round of applause. Okay. And of course, I'd like to thank Rachel Hugh for hosting this, as well as for Chris Garaffa, who does amazing work on tech. And they also, as Rachel mentioned, do a weekly broadcast radio show called Covert Action Bulletin. So I strongly encourage you to go check that out. Every Wednesday, it's on WBI at 9 a.m. And you can also become a member on Patreon and support that show. Okay, I also want to thank our subscribers, okay, and our donors. And if anybody here is not yet a subscriber, don't be shy. You can always go to the site and sign up, or you can go to the table over here and you can sign up as a subscriber or make a donation. Lastly, I want to thank everyone at this People's Forum who helps keep the People's Forum going. Let's give a round of applause. This is such an incredible location, right? What a wonderful resource that we have here in New York City to support social change organizations and social justice organizations. Okay. There's also, by the way, if you haven't noticed, at the front, all the back issues from 1978 all the way through the printing era of the magazine, which are here. You can buy individual issues. You can also buy a whole full back issue set of all the issues. And we will mail it to you if you want to purchase that today. Also, by the way, we're having a raffle. Did anybody tell you about the raffle as you came in? Okay, so at the raffle, Mike Locker is over there, sitting there, receiving your entrance into the raffle. Okay, so what you do is just put your name, and the raffle tickets are $15. How about that? $15 for a whole $500 value back issue set. There's going to be 2 winners tonight. Okay. So if you join the raffle at $15, you have a chance to win a full back issue set. Okay, let's see. We need to support these organizations and their fight for social justice more than ever now. We have journalists and whistleblowers and social justice activists like Julian Assange, Daniel Hale, Mumia Abu-Jamal, Leonard Peltier still sitting in prison. We have investigative journalism outlets like Consortium News and Mint Press that are getting their funding vehicles shut down for exposing the NATO aggression, that led to the Ukrainian war. Perhaps Covert Action is next. Are we going to get shut down? By the way, if there's a spy in the room, just come up and talk to me. Let me know what you guys are planning to do. But I'll just simply tell you, you can try to silence us, but you're not going to kill the truth. We need to support other activist outlets too, investigative reporting like Black Agenda Report, Global Research, Live on the Fly. Randy Credico is here, by the way. He's going to be speaking. Where are you, Randy? Randy. Oh, he's over there. Randy Credico. He's going to be speaking tonight. And the Gray Zone, Multipolarista, WikiLeaks, and Who, What, Why, to name a few. And of course, we need to support Covert Action Magazine to help analyze social injustices and complex events around the world. In the production of this investigative reporting, I would like to share with you that we don't always agree, right? There's going to be different points of view in our speakers tonight in terms of our articles that we publish. These different points of view, we even have authors and readers who have different points of view, but we do draw the line. We draw the line at a specific point, and at least this is how I feel, is that we are anti-imperialists, first of all, right? We are anti-capitalists, and we are adamant about promoting social justice and solidarity. So we need to find our common spaces together and work together, because we have very, very challenging times coming. CAM is also committed, I want you all to know, to publishing authors and activists around the world, particularly in the global south and in war-torn regions, particularly those suffering the brunt of U.S. imperialism and imperialism in general and plutocratic oppression. So please, those of you who are out there, send your articles in. We would love to publish you, and we would. We have actually tripled our. How do you say this? Our exposure in terms of views. Like this year we've already reached about 1.5 million viewers, from over 190 countries around the world, and that. Exposure is increasing exponentially, and we hope that will continue for years to come. So this is all important, all the more important now, for we have the potential world war, nuclear catastrophe on the horizon as Russia and China and the global south perhaps successfully challenge U.S. hegemony. At home, we have institutionalized racism, gross inequality, class conflict, and a public health crisis from, for example, gun violence to the epidemics on the rise, all overshadowed with the environmental catastrophe through unbridled capitalism galloping towards species extinction. Even right now, we have the U.S. government, for example, is about to intervene in the railroad strike. We need to support workers and unions all the more. All right, let's give a round of applause for that. Okay. And then, on top of that, we have potentially an insurrectionist, fascist movement that aims to ramp up U.S. imperialism and domestic oppression in the coming years. So we need investigative journalism to expose and analyze all these calamities. But more importantly, in addition to the analysis, we need to act. We need to act. So we need to take this information. We need to network tonight. We need to develop actions, innovative, multi-issue movements that actively push back against imperialism. We need to get to where the young people are, right? Like on social media, okay? We need to get from the social media to direct action on the streets, not just speaking truth to power, but actually taking power, okay? The very survival of humanity is at stake. And every time I think about these issues, it leads me to the main culprit. In my opinion, it's the capitalist economic system with fascist imperialism as its logical conclusion. That's why we need to support the continued exposure of covert action, the tools that imperialism and plutocrats use worldwide to subvert, oppress, and destroy movements that advocate for more environmental, sustainable society and equitable societies free from racism, sexism, and class conflict. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks. Okay.
Thank you so much for those opening words, Chris. We really appreciate it. So I want to move our program along to our next speaker. Our next speaker is, you might be familiar with his work if you have been to our website. Of course, you've read many of his articles and the incredible things that he produces on a daily basis, weekly basis. So much hard work goes into it. I'm excited to introduce Jeremy Kuzmarov, who's the managing editor of Covert Action magazine. He's also the author of 4 books on U.S. foreign policy, including Obama's Unending Wars and The Russians Are Coming Again, with John Marciano. Welcome up, Jeremy.
Well, thank you, and thanks for everyone for coming here tonight. In 2003, the year the Iraq War broke out, I was a graduate student at Brandeis University, getting a political education, reading books mainly in the library. 2 books had a profound impact on me. One was, and many may be familiar with these books, certainly the second. The first was Fred Branfman's book, Voices from the Plain of Jar, Life Under an Air War, which I don't know how many are familiar with that book. But it's a poignant account, really, of the human consequences of the Indochina wars and the bombing that Fred experienced firsthand. And really, yeah, like no others, show the terrible human costs of that horrible war. And the second book, if you guessed it, was Philip Agee's book, Inside the Company, a CIA diary. And this, as I think many of you know here, and yeah, perhaps for younger people, if you haven't yet read the book, it's still of great relevance today. And subsequently, I read that book and Lou Wolf's books, Dirty Work 1 and 2 on the CIA in Europe and Africa, and numerous articles from the old Covert Action Information Bulletin, some while doing research for a book that I'd published on clandestine policing operations in the Cold War, and some were actually read on the CIA's CREST system. If you go to the National Archives, you can look in the old CIA files on their CREST system, and they have the old issues of Covert Action because they were obviously monitoring Covert Action and reading it. They were probably the most careful reader of the magazine. So, and yeah, it's amazing for me, 17 years after doing all those studies and having my own political awakening, it was the honor of my lifetime to be reappointed, to be appointed as managing editor of Covert Action, as it was revitalized by Chris Agee and Lou Wolf. And I find the need for this magazine, maybe even greater today than in the 1970s when the magazine was first founded. Most of you here tonight are familiar with the Church Committee, which was set up in 1975 by Frank Church to expose CIA abuses, including use of the mafia to carry out assassination of foreign leaders like Fidel Castro. This September, I authored a CAM article entitled, "We Need a New Church Committee to Curb Massive Intelligence Agency Criminality, Ranging from Illegal Surveillance to Torture and Assassination." In this article, I wrote that, quote, "In the nearly 50 years since the Church Committee hearings were held, the intelligence agencies have grown exceedingly more powerful and replicated the pattern of abuse prevalent in the immediate post-World War II era. These abuses have included running secret torture sites in the War on Terror, coordinating a killer drone program in which even U.S. citizens have been targeted without any judicial process, orchestrating a fake political scandal, Russiagate, based on fraudulent dossiers which help condition the public to support a new Cold War with Russia and possible nuclear war. The CIA and associated intelligence agencies, which have grown, it's not just the CIA now, it's 16 other agencies. They have additionally expanded an unprecedented surveillance apparatus that violates the U.S. Constitution, promoted disinformation in support of illegal wars in Libya, Syria, Ukraine, among other countries, continue to meddle in foreign countries through the National Endowment for Democracy, a CIA offshoot, and to support color revolutions designed to facilitate regime change in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and have helped coordinate a Phoenix-style operation in Ukraine through liaison with the Ukrainian secret services, which routinely kidnaps civilians and executes them without trial. Further investigation is also needed into the extent to which the CIA, FBI, and related intelligence agencies have adopted COINTELPRO-style operations today designed to manipulate public opinion, co-opt protest movements, and destroy the U.S. left. The extent to which they've perpetrated black flag or terrorist attacks as part of a strategy of tension designed to sow fear in the public and advance legislation that violates civil liberties and the U.S. Bill of Rights, and the extent to which they've supported presidential candidates such as George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama, among others, and in the process further tarnish the impression of the U.S. as a so-called democratic country. Covert Action magazine has a vital role to fulfill in trying to educate the public on the nefarious influence of U.S. intelligence agencies, on the abuses of power that go on in the public's name, and also on the political economy of U.S. imperialism, which Agee was excellent in analyzing. There really are very few, if any, media outlets, including the alternative universe, that cover these areas properly or effectively. Since February, we have published numerous articles debunking the myth of an unprovoked Russian invasion in Ukraine and debunking the official narrative about that war. We've offered the neglected perspective of the peoples of eastern Ukraine who are completely ignored and were subject to ethnic cleansing operations since 2014. We have, by the Ukrainian army, subsidized by the United States and EU. We have also spotlighted the Biden administration's reckless provocation of China, continued political interference in South America, expansion of AFRICOM. We've also run numerous historical pieces to remind people about the CIA's terrible history. We've looked at political assassinations in the United States. And these are, I think, often not covered at all or denied, that assassinations go on and that our political history is as violent as many other countries. We've cast critical attention on the FBI, on the National Endowment for Democracy, and we've spotlighted 2 former CIA officers in Congress, Abigail Spanberger and Elisa Slotkin, who won re-election last month, while we were also supporting the anti-CIA candidate Jeffrey Young, who unfortunately lost in Kentucky. I want to thank everyone in the room who has assisted us in our work and supported us and come out tonight to support us. And I would like to enlist everyone's support tonight in helping us to improve our magazine, to be able to broaden our coverage and broaden our reach, so we can help the public better understand what is going on and in turn what we need to do to challenge the corruption. Again, thank you very much. Any help you can offer us, whether it's financial, whether it's help with articles and other aspects of our magazine, would be most welcome, because we have a really important mission and we need all of your support. Thank you.
And certainly I want to also draw your attention to, if you want to get involved with Covert Action Magazine, if you want to not just write or help publish, help produce, we really want to encourage you to volunteer with us, get to know us. You can come and talk to any of us. You can also talk to Tiger in the front, who can take your information as well, because there's so many different ways that we can get involved in fighting back against this system. So I want to introduce our next speaker, who's left us some incredible words and a message, who could not be here, unfortunately, because he is based in Latin America. So Ben Norton is going to be speaking, giving you guys some words tonight. He's speaking about a variety of different things on geopolitics, empire. He's an independent journalist who is the founder and editor of Multipolarista. Let's hear it from a couple of words from Ben.
Hey everyone, I'm Ben Norton, and it's a real pleasure being able to speak at this event organized by Covert Action. Covert Action has been a big influence on me and my work, so it's a real privilege. I wish I could be with you all there in person. Unfortunately, I'm not in the US, and in general, I just try to avoid going to the US. But I'm really glad that you could all be there in person, and especially at a place like the People's Forum, which is an excellent space. Today, I'm just going to talk a little bit about why I think alternative media is really important in this moment and how dangerous this geopolitical moment is. The US empire is facing fundamental crises, and empires, when they're in decline, when they face crises, often commit their worst crimes. The British Empire committed genocide and oversaw mass famines in South Asia, the Bengal famine. The German Empire led to Nazism. The French Empire killed more than 1 million Algerians to prevent decolonization. The Turkish Empire, the Ottoman Empire, committed genocide against Armenians and Greeks and Assyrians. And the US Empire has committed unimaginable, horrific crimes for decades, with tens of millions of people killed, including 3 million killed in Vietnam, 3 million killed in Korea, between 1 and 3 million killed in Indonesia. But, how many? 1 million killed in Iraq, in the second Iraq war, in the first Iraq war with the sanctions imposed in the 1990s. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands who died because of sanctions. The list goes on, obviously. But as horrific as that history is, there's still a very real possibility that the US empire could commit even worse atrocities, just as the German Empire committed horrific atrocities in southern Africa, and that was one of the influences for the creation of concentration camps, along with the the U.S. Government's use of internment camps for indigenous peoples. Those were the use of camps by the German Empire and the U.S. Empire is what inspired the Nazis. So the point is that as horrific as the U.S. Empire is, we should not underestimate it. And of course, we're constantly told by respectable liberals and mainstream corporate media that the U.S. is not an empire. So, I mean, they're just living on another planet where not only is the U.S. not an empire, but it's a benevolent entity. I mean, fortunately, I know I'm speaking to an audience here at Covert Action that understands that very well. And Covert Action has done better work than I think really probably any other publication in exposing the crimes of that empire and in emphasizing that you can't have an empire without that element of criminality, of covert operations. Those are the shock troops of empire. And it is fundamentally predicated on the violation of democracy, on the violation of human rights. The laughable, risible idea that the US government in any way cares about ideas like democracy and human rights is completely belied by what it does abroad, outside of its borders, and inside of its borders, frankly, with assassinations and spying and threats and blackmail, and the list goes on. I mean, Covert Action has done so much good work in exposing that, and I would really invite people to go check out their archives. Now, as for the role of alternative media in all of this, the US government is waging a new Cold War, not only against Russia, which is very clear with the proxy war in Ukraine. The US has spent tens of billions of dollars flooding Ukraine with weapons. CBS produced a documentary that found that only around 30% of the tens of billions of dollars worth of weapons that the US is sending to Ukraine actually make it to the front lines. That is to say that it's going to the black market, and who knows what future wars and future violent crises are going to be fueled by this massive arms cache that is just, flooding the entire region. Let's not forget what happened when NATO destroyed Libya, the most prosperous country in Africa, in 2011, after the Libyan military's weapons cache was sent by the CIA to Syria to train and arm the so-called moderate rebels in Syria, who were dominated by Salafi jihadists, Jabhat al-Nusra, which is the Al-Qaeda affiliate, eventually ISIS. A lot of those weapons came from Libya. We know that because of the reporting of Cy Hirsch. And of course, we've seen similar situations with Yugoslavia, with the arms caches as well there when NATO was waging war in Yugoslavia. So the point is that there's a long history of this. And the fact that that CBS documentary that I mentioned, detailing the corruption and the arms trafficking in Ukraine, that documentary was censored, is a testament to how important alternative media is. Now, who censored that CBS documentary? CBS itself. They didn't even need to be ordered. Maybe they were, but they did it themselves. The Ukrainian government complained. Who knows? Maybe the US government behind the scenes told them to cut their own documentary, and they did it. That shows why it is so important to have alternative media outlets like Covert Action. Because the corporate media, even when it reports something that might make the empire look bad, when it acknowledges inconvenient facts for the empire, about the empire, it censors those inconvenient facts. And clearly, the situation, I think, is going to get much worse. I have worked in alternative media in the United States for about a decade, and I have to say the situation is getting worse, not better. I worked, for instance, at Alternet, which no longer really exists. Alternet was bought by a multimillionaire Hillary Clinton donor and basically destroyed, turned into just a content aggregation hub for liberal Democratic Party clickbait. I worked at Salon.com, which had a little space for more radical voices, and they were all pushed out. And I mean, I guess it exists, but come on, who reads Salon.com now? There was more space in outlets like Democracy Now! And I don't want to use this opportunity here at Covert Action in this event to just, talk gossip and attack other media outlets. But, just to name a few examples of these, Democracy Now! Has become another kind of liberal, social democratic oriented media outlet that doesn't really challenge the empire. It doesn't challenge covert operations. It doesn't challenge the new Cold War on China and Russia. It certainly didn't challenge the propaganda narratives about the dirty war on Syria or the dirty war in Libya. So the point is that there were 10 or 20 years ago, I would say, more spaces for critiques of the empire. Now, maybe they were not super genuine. As we saw in the 2000s under the Bush administration, many of those people who were involved in the movement against the Iraq War ended up becoming cheerleaders for Obama's war. So certainly there's an element of opportunism in there. But the point I'm getting at is that the media space for critics of empire, for people who understand and show factually with evidence and reporting that this empire is predicated on criminality and violations of democracy and human rights. The space is very limited and increasingly more and more limited. That's why I think it's really important to support Covert Action and other media outlets, independent outlets, where we're doing similar work. I mean, I consider the comrades and friends over at Covert Action to be colleagues. I mean, we're part of a common collective struggle. And again, as I conclude here, I just want to say that as we are in a new Cold War, information is being weaponized everywhere. There's this obsession with the concept of so-called disinformation. And if you say anything, even if it's objectively, undeniably true, if it's inconvenient for the narratives for the US empire, you will be accused of spreading disinformation and acting on behalf of a foreign government. It's a very dangerous moment as well to be an independent journalist that actually challenges the empire. So that's why I think it's even more important that Covert Action today is having this event. It's why it's important to support Covert Action, and it's why it's a real privilege for me to speak at this event as someone who's benefited from the amazing work of Philip Agee and others. And I think we should continue in their footsteps. People like Philip Agee, I think, should be our role models. They show us what we can do and that we can have a positive impact in the world. So thanks a lot.
Give it up for Ben. You can hear it on the stream, so he's here with us at least. I mean, I definitely want to say to Ben's point, I was recently in Vietnam, and for the first time ever, I'm Vietnamese, but it was the first time I was there, and they had this incredible display dedicated to the journalists who lost their lives in Vietnam to tell the real story, to tell the truth. I saw images that I've never seen published anywhere else in the United States. You can't Google them, you can't find them, but they exist. And I think it's an incredible testament to the kind of sacrifice and struggle that those journalists really did in Vietnam. The majority of them were Vietnamese, but many of them were from the United States, from Japan, all over the world. And so the contribution of journalism and the potential to expose the truth, to expose the empire for what it is and what it does is so profound and so important. And so I'm really happy to be here today and really happy to keep being a part of what we do at Covert Action Magazine and keep that tradition going. So I want to introduce our next couple of speakers. We have a few folks who are going to be giving us some really short video messages, and then we have some other folks with us here today. We have time at the end of our event as well to mingle and network, so don't go anywhere. Stay, talk with us, get to know us. So our next short message is from Scott Ritter, activist, author, and whistleblower. We're going to listen to a short message from Scott now.
My name is Scott Ritter. I've been asked to speak on behalf of Covert Action Magazine. In this day and age of conflict, especially the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, we need to realize that there's an active, ongoing disinformation campaign, information warfare, being waged by the United States government in concert with its Ukrainian allies and its European allies to distort the truth about what's happening in Ukraine. Not only about what's happening on the ground as we speak, but how it came about to be. Who started this conflict? Who should be held responsible? And how is this conflict going to end? Voices that dissent are suppressed, kicked off of social media platforms, denied access to other media outlets. And this is where Covert Action Magazine comes into play. It provides an opportunity for voices like Larry Johnson, Eva Bartlett, John Karyakov, and Jeremy Kuzmarov, and others, to provide fact-based, sound, analytical, researched documents, papers, articles about the situation in Ukraine and elsewhere in the world. I look forward to participating in this effort in the near future with Covert Action Magazine, and I would encourage everybody to support Covert Action Magazine as much as possible. Again, my name is Scott Ritter. Thank you very much, and I look forward to getting together with you on the pages of Covert Action Magazine.
Excellent. In our next video, we are going to hear some words from Ashley Jovic. She's a whistleblower. If you didn't get a chance on the Covert Action Bulletin, we did an interview with Ashley, a very extensive interview talking about her experiences in Silicon Valley and about all of the information that she revealed about Apple. She's been doing investigative journalism since, connecting how the CIA and a variety of different agencies within the United States government are also within Silicon Valley in big tech. There really is so much that she's doing. She was also somebody who has become an activist against big tech's role in the military-industrial complex. So we want to hear a little bit from Ashley.
Everyone, my name is Ashley. I'm really excited to join you tonight and to support Covert Action. I was a longtime big tech worker who turned whistleblower last year. I was a senior engineering program manager at Apple for over 6 years, working at the Apple headquarters in sunny Santa Clara Valley, California. And during that time, I never imagined I could become an exiled corporate dissident and whistleblower, especially after simply inquiring about scientific and regulatory information related to the office where I worked. Apple proudly markets their products as vehicles for fundamental human rights, and their company is leaders in social good. However, the veil is quickly lifted when a true weakness is exposed, and I would discover firsthand that Apple is not the company it holds itself out to be. I would also learn Apple is not simply a company, as the conflicts of interest and networks I discovered between Apple and the US federal government were truly breathtaking. After everything I discovered and exposed, I'm not surprised they have all invested so much effort in making me absolutely miserable. So why did this even happen? My Apple office in Sunnyvale sat atop a 2-kilometer lake of poison. The lake was a cocktail of hellish chemicals, but predominantly the incredibly toxic TCE. There was so much of it and so close to the surface, the chemicals had been forcing themselves up into the buildings in the area as they broke down and vaporized, which in turn led to exposing the humans in the buildings where they would breathe in the chemicals. My office was so toxic, it was declared a federal Superfund site, the TRW microwave site regulated under CERCLA and administered by the US EPA. In 2013, The Atlantic literally called my office a paved-over environmental disaster zone. By that point, my office was also part of the triple site with 3 large toxic groundwater plumes merged into one mega plume. In March 2021, Apple unexpectedly emailed my team, including me, who's me and the managers, saying they want to test for vapor intrusion in our office, while apparently intentionally avoiding explaining what that term meant or notifying us we were on a Superfund site. I would later be informed by Apple that we had no right to know. I raised concerns about the safety at my office and was quickly and severely retaliated upon. The degree to which Apple retaliated against me sickens me, and I should have never been subjected to that. Neither should anyone else, as I told Apple as they were doing it. While Apple was busy flogging me for reporting safety concerns, I began asking if they were abusing me so severely because the previous CEO of the corporation who created that lake of poison under my office was now a current member of Apple's board of directors. And or if because the previous head of the US EPA now reports to Tim Cook, Apple's CEO. Apple did not like those questions at all. I later learned that indeed Ronald Sugar was CEO of the company responsible for the dumping of toxic chemicals under my office. He was still an advisor to that company as he chaired the Finance and Audit Committee at Apple. overseeing things like Apple's real estate, due diligence, and safety. His prior company is Northrop Grumman, the weapons manufacturer. In addition, my concerns about the US EPA were validated to an extent worse than I expected when I complained to the EPA about Apple in April of 2021. Per FOIA documents I requested, the EPA turned around and told Apple I had complained, even meeting with Apple to strategize how to respond to me. The Apple executive who used to run the EPA, Lisa Jackson, now reports to Tim Cook, running his lobbying and government affairs teams. She also sits on the board of the Clinton Foundation, as in prior US President Bill Clinton. The US EPA would also inspect my Apple office while I was suspended in August, finding a number of potential safety issues, but not saying a word to me about it. In fact, the only way I've been able to get information from the EPA on this matter is through FOIA requests with extremely long turnaround times, nearly a year. And of course, Apple didn't mention any of this either. I quickly realized that I was naively and likely futilely seeking justice against Apple through the very government that appeared, in essence, to also be Apple itself. But I also realized nothing was going to change if I just quit, kept my mouth shut, and found another high-paying corporate job somewhere else. I knew it was my coworkers' health in line and mine, so, well, it was going to be a battle. It was a worthwhile fight, no matter the outcome. During all this, I had read about Apple's history of searches, surveillance, their secret police. It made me nauseous. I not only felt powerless and violated, but I started to realize just how extensive the power differential between me and my employer was. This is one of the biggest companies in the world, the company with the suicide nets, the Uyghur slave labor, conflict minerals, $100 billion compromises with authoritarian governments. I started to feel scared, not just anxious, but deeply fearful of Apple. Workplace violence interrogator would instigate my termination not 10 minutes after I posted about an article from 2011 about Apple breaking into someone's apartment and threatening to deport a Latino man with no basis, apparently looking for some lost prototype. The interrogator sent me an email without a subject line and insisted I get on the phone with him within the hour. I would request to keep the conversation in writing, noting my NLRB affidavit was the next day, and his contact felt like witness intimidation the day before my federal affidavit. I'd be fired 4 hours later. No explanation, just vague allegations of policy violations, and several weeks later I'd receive some of my possessions from work, mailed to me in a box full of glass shards. I'd receive a bizarre letter from Apple's lawyers asking me to delete some of my Twitter posts about my privacy and surveillance concerns, still not telling me why I was fired. And Apple never told me directly, but I got a copy of a letter they sent the government in March of this year, claiming it was because I had protested Apple asking to scan my ears, assumably gathering my biometrics, and because I exposed an internal application that harvested employee biometrics and took videos of us whenever it thought it saw a face, even if we were naked in the bathroom with family. And that connected the Twitter post Apple's lawyers asked me to remove about surveillance. Through all of this, I'd face threats of physical violence, bankruptcy, retaliatory litigation, character assassination, denial listing, and actual attempts of most of the above. I'd find myself filing police reports for attempted break-ins, suspected listening devices planted in my possessions. I'd see sedans with dark windows parked outside my apartment. My neighbors reported seeing unknown parties snooping around our courtyard. The press began covering this ordeal in July, but quickly fixated on non-material portions of my disclosures. Despite my reports of fraud, safety, suppression of labor rights, I quickly became an international sexism whistleblower based on a handful of tangentially related Twitter posts. I struggled to get reporters to write about the topics most critical of Apple. I shared my stories of discrimination as well, at first assuming it was some sort of communication issue and happy to expose what I could. And later I would learn the publishers who originally broke my story and strategically omitted much of the safety, environmental, and fraud issues were run by executives within the Democratic Party. You know, Clinton, Obama, Biden, all of those US presidents and their administrations actively entwined with Apple's interests and what I was trying to expose. So I worked with some reporters who tried in earnest to capture the material parts of my story, and some succeeded. But after a few months, they all appeared to become censored themselves at the major publishers. And for most publishers with, Apple News and TV deals, apps in the iOS App Store, advertising contracts, and an interest in being invited to Apple's events, I went from being a sexism whistleblower who may or may have not been around a Superfund site to a leaker, to nothing at all, sometimes written out of the history of everything that happened that year. But I have not given up, and I continue to share my story and press these issues. And I'm incredibly grateful for groups like Covert Action who are not only willing to share stories like mine, but who want to share stories like mine. When they reached out, they were so excited to learn more and talk to me, and it encouraged me to keep fighting on all of this, that people do care. In an age where stories most critical of billionaires and mega corporations, critical of public corruption and intelligence mischief, are so easily and frequently censored, we need groups like Covert Action more than ever. Please support Covert Action and help them be able to tell more stories like mine. Thank you so much.
Definitely. Ashley has so much to share. I mean, it's really insane to think that Apple is hiring private police that were formerly CIA agents and all of the work that they're doing. She wrote extensively about regulatory capture and how essentially most of all of the people that oversee Apple in any way, shape, or form, government bodies, have a vested interest in Apple succeeding to begin with. So a lot of important stuff there. We really wanted to bring her voice and her story out because, like she mentioned, not many places are willing to, not many publishers are willing to, so it's an important story to bring forward. So I'm excited to bring in our next speaker, who is also a whistleblower, but a whistleblower of a different type, somebody who I am very excited to hear from, and I am very honored to work with regularly. We are going to be joined now by John Kiriakou. John is a former CIA analyst, whistleblower, and he's a member of the editorial board of Covert Action magazine. Thanks for coming, John.
Thank you, Thank you, everybody. I don't know if I can top that. Wow. I've had 15 years to get over my whistleblowing, but that just blew me away. Well, my name is John Kiriakou. I spent 15 years in the CIA before coming to my senses, and half of that was in counterterrorism. Now, we've all heard about historical covert operations like Operation Paperclip, in which one part of the US government was trying to bring Nazi war criminals to justice, while the OSS and the CIA was trying to bring them to Washington so that they could work for us. They did, mostly at NASA and the Defense Department, and they gave us our rocket program, even though they were Nazi war criminals. We all know about MK Ultra, which did horrific things to people who had never, ever given consent for the kinds of things that the CIA did in terms of experimentation on them. The CIA dosed people unknowingly, unwittingly with LSD. There are credible allegations that the CIA dosed an entire village's bread supply in France to see how people would respond to it. But what I wanted to talk about in the time that I have is counterterrorism and what happened in our country post 9/11. I was in the CIA's Counterterrorism Center for the second half of my career. And just to give you an idea of the kind of organization that the Counterterrorism Center was, I sat about 25 feet away from a guy named Enrico Rick Prado. Nicest guy in the world, right? Every morning, hey Rick, hey John, how was your weekend? Hey, it was great, how was yours? And then he would sort of disappear for a week or 2 weeks at a time, and he'd come back and he'd say, hey fellas, how have the last couple of weeks been? We'd say, they were great, Rick. Finally, I said to a coworker, what exactly does he do here? He doesn't have a name tag next to his office or anything. He's clearly somebody, because you have to be somebody to have a private office. The rest of us were just in a cubicle farm. And my coworker said, John, he's the head of the Special Activities Division. And I was like, oh. So he's going, my friend said, to kill people. He gets a name and an assignment. He flies with his team to wherever he goes. He kills somebody in cold blood. And then he comes back and we talk about our kids and our families and have a barbecue on Saturdays. I'm not exaggerating. I'm serious. It was only then that I realized that so many of these people who pretend to be patriots and lovers of freedom and democracy and civil liberties are really not much more than stone cold killers. People who don't even understand why they're doing the killing. After I left the CIA, I became friendly, very friendly in some cases, with some of the people whom the CIA had snatched and had taken to Guantanamo, or worse yet, who had been taken to third countries. A rendition is when the CIA grabs somebody and sends them either back to their country of origin to face trial, or worse, or brings them back to the United States to face trial. An extraordinary rendition is when you grab somebody and send him to a secret prison or to a third country. Why would you kidnap, and I'm just making this up, but why would you kidnap a Moroccan and send him to Syria? Because the Syrians are going to pull all of his fingernails out and electrocute him, and nobody's going to care because nobody even knows where he is. That happens every single day. One of those people was a Canadian political science professor from the University of Toronto by the name of Maher Arar. Maher was literally just a political science professor, but he had a cousin in the Middle East. And the cousin may or may not have once placed a phone call to somebody who may or may not have been involved with Hezbollah. We don't know. It doesn't matter because Maher's just a political science professor at the University of Toronto. So he went to visit family. His mother was old and infirm. He went to Syria to visit his family. And he spent about 3 weeks there, and then he flew back. Now, it's hard to fly directly to Toronto. He had to transit JFK here in New York. And when he arrived at JFK, the FBI was waiting for him. He had no idea why, and they wouldn't tell him. But they snatched him off the plane, and they turned him over to the CIA. And what did the CIA do? They sent him back to Syria. And they said, this guy is a dangerous terrorist, probably Al-Qaeda. We want you to do whatever it is you need to do and get us the information. They tortured him mercilessly. And 9 months later, the Syrians came back to us and they said, we think this is the wrong guy. There was somebody else named Maher something. It wasn't Maher Arar. Again, he's a political science professor. Now, his wife, in the meantime, was waiting for him at the airport, and he never showed up. And so she went to the authorities, and they said, oh, you know what, we checked, and he wasn't on the plane. He's probably still in wherever it was he was, Beirut or Damascus or whatever. A month later, she gets a credit card bill, and he had made a purchase on board from the duty-free. So she knew he was on that plane. She finally was able to force, through her attorneys, the Canadian government to approach the FBI and ask what happened to him. And the FBI went to the CIA, and the CIA said, okay, well, the Syrians told us he's the wrong guy, so we're going to let him go. I spoke to Maher not too long ago, and he told me that his PTSD is so severe that he hasn't left his home in 8 years. That's prison. That's what prison is. I was in prison. I can tell you that house arrest is worse than prison because you're confined to those 4 walls of your house. That's it. There's no going out to the yard to exercise or play basketball or softball or whatever. You're in prison, even if it's your own home. There was another man by the name of Khalid al-Masri. The word al-Masri means the Egyptian. So about 1 billion people have that name in the Middle East, right? It just means that somebody at some point in your extended family was from Egypt. And Khalid is like, John in the West. Khalid al-Masri was a German citizen, and he was a greengrocer. He owned a little mom and pop store in Germany, and he sold fruits and vegetables, and it was like a bodega. He had a fight with his wife one night, and he walked out of the house in a huff, and he said, you know, this marriage is failing. I'm going to get on a bus, and I'm going to go to Montenegro and visit my brother. His brother was a refugee in Montenegro. So he got a cheap German bus and started his way to Montenegro. At the same time, the CIA gets a tip that there's an Egyptian guy, and he's going to blow up the American embassy in Tirana, Albania. So they look through their databases and they say, oh my God, there's a guy named Al-Masri, Khalid Al-Masri, and he's on a bus that's going in the general direction of Tirana, Albania. So they call the Serbian intelligence service and they say, stop this bus before it gets to Montenegro and grab this guy. So they did, and they turned him over to us. Well, we didn't want the Germans to know that we had one of their citizens. That's not sporting. You can't do that. So we sent him to Egypt. And we told the Egyptians, do your thing. And they came back to us a year later and said, we think this is the wrong guy. This guy's name just happens to be Al-Masri. There was never any attack on the American embassy in Tirana. He wasn't even going to Tirana. He was going to Montenegro to visit his brother, for heaven's sakes. But I'll tell you what, when the Egyptians finally let him out, he had a beard down to here, he was clutching a copy of the Quran, and he said all he wanted to do was kill an American. That's why Covert Action magazine is so important, because nobody else is talking about these issues. Nobody else is writing about these monstrous events that happen in the name of the American people. We own this information as Americans. We have a right to know what our government is doing in our name. And the only people who are willing to actually put it in writing and send it out there is Covert Action magazine. That's it. This magazine has been around for a long time. It's a survivor. And it's a survivor because of people like us, that we're willing to put our money where our mouths are. Let me add one other thing, and I'm going to reach into my pocket and get my phone. About a year ago, I received an email that looked like it was from Apple. I wasn't sure. So, actually, now my phone is, oh, there it is, okay. It looked like it was from Apple. But, you know, a lot of things look like they're from important companies. So I called NSA whistleblower Tom Drake. And I said, Tom, I'm going to forward an email to you. Tell me if you think this is real. It says, notice regarding request for customer data. Dear account holder / Mr. Kiriakou. On February 18th, 2021, Apple received a legal request from the Federal Bureau of Investigation requesting information regarding your Apple account. This legal request only allowed delayed notice to the affected customer. The contact information in relation to the request is as follows. Requesting agency, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Requesting agency location, New York Field Office. Legal request type, subpoena. Requesting agency case number, and has a really long case number. Pursuant to the terms of service, blah, blah, blah. He said, yeah, it's legit. So I called Apple. He gave me a number. They don't like say, hey, here's our 800 number, you can call us. So he gave me a number. And the woman said, we don't know anything. The FBI came with a subpoena. You have to call the FBI. I called the FBI. You know what they say. File a Freedom of Information Act request. It took me a year. Excuse me. It took me a year. They told me that somebody was disturbed by some of my writings, complaining about the CIA and the FBI, and so they wrote to the FBI and reported me for conspiracy to commit domestic terrorism. They took 5 years of my emails. I had no idea. This is the second time they've done this to me, by the way. 5 years of my emails. Because I've expressed myself as an American citizen, I've exercised my constitutional rights to freedom of speech and freedom of press. That could happen to anybody in this room. Anybody. They don't like what you're thinking. They don't like what you're writing or what you're reading. And that's why we have to keep up the fight. I have have to add too, I'm thrilled to see so many people here in person. I know we have a lot of people on Zoom, which is wonderful, but in person, this is really heartening. So please, I'm asking you, be generous with Covert Action Magazine. It's more important than most of us realize. It's what stands between us and fascism, and we have to fight it without stopping. Thank you very much. I hope you have a great night. Thank you.
Give it up for John. Those are some great words. And just a reminder, anytime tonight, if you want to give anything to Covert Action Magazine,